everyone, this is Ashley Jamerson coming to you from Ashley Lambert Realty right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And as you can see in the title, I'm going to be talking about appraisals today. And appraisals are something that scares agents, that gets the buyers and sellers nervous because they're always wondering if the house appraised. So I am going to answer some questions about what happens if the house you have under contract does not appraise for the purchase price. First and foremost, let's talk about appraised value versus market value. If you watch my other videos, you know that this market right now is crazy. It's a crazy seller's market, meaning that there aren't a lot of properties, but there's a ton of buyers. Sellers have the upper hand. And if you're watching your favorite house that got snagged by someone else, you may know that the house may have been listed at $250 and sold for $270. And you're like, what? And that's happening. That happens every day. But every now and then you will notice that a house was under contract and it came back on the market. And if you look very closely, when it was on the market previously, it may have said FHA, VA, conventional, USDA financing available. And then when it comes back on the market the second time, it'll just say conventional. And here is why. Whenever a house does not appraise and the buyer is an FHA or VA buyer, that FHA VA appraisal sort of sticks to that house for 6 months. So let's say they were under contract for $270 and the house was listed for $265 and the appraisal came in at $250. So it came in like a lot under. And the seller wouldn't budge, the buyer wouldn't budge, they couldn't make ends meet. And the seller decided to put the house back on the market once the buyer terminated. They can sell that house FHA VA, but they will have to deal with that appraisal for the next 6 months, or they can put the house back on the market and sell it conventional, or of course to a cash buyer. So if you see houses coming off on and off the market, that may be a reason. If you are a buyer and the house does not appraise, you do have the option to ask the seller to lower the purchase price. So using that same example of $270 and the appraisal coming in at $250, the buyer can say, hey, seller, I know that you think that your house is worth this much, but the appraisal came in lower at $250. Can we lower the purchase price to $250? Now, the likelihood of that happening basically depends on the seller's current financial position and what they're doing, what they had planned, how much they owe on the house, etc. So that is one option out there. You can always have your agent just ask to lower the price with the proof of the appraisal. Now, if you do that, the seller can say, well, get the house reappraised. I don't think that my house is worth that little. And if that happens, they can either give the buyer the money for the reappraisal, or the buyer can pay for a reappraisal or second opinion. Typically, appraisers stick to their guns. I do not think they send out a brand new appraiser. They just send, well, yeah, they would. They would send out a new appraiser if you paid for a full-on new appraisal. So they send out a new appraiser, but more than likely, they're going to use the same comps and they'll come up with a similar price. Your agent, the buyer's agent, could send comps saying this is why we offer this amount of money because this is what's going on in the local market. Sometimes appraisers don't really keep up with the local trends of this crazy seller's market. So that's a possibility. If it happens and I'm the listing agent and it comes in lower, what I'll do is I'll send in my CMA, which is a comparative market analysis. I'll send that in to the buyer's agent to send to the lender to forward to the appraiser, because we're all arm's length here. So I'll send it and I'll say, this is the CMA that I prepared. This is how I came up with this number. These are the houses that I used. These are the adjustments that I made, etc. So we can always send that in. They can look it over. If they're missing a comp or something recently closed within the past couple of days and it was a higher price that would positively affect the appraisal, then yeah, they might use it. So you can ask for a lower price. You can do the You can send in the comparables. Also ask the buyer to bring in the difference. So if they have the cash and if it's in like a highly desirable area that's up and coming and they know that the market will be there eventually if it's not there now, they can keep the purchase price at $270 and they can bring the difference of, let's say, $20,000 in this example, and get the loan for $250. So they would be putting more money down at closing. Sometimes buyers have that flexibility, sometimes they don't. Sometimes buyers really love the property. I usually leave that up to my buyer if that happens, because I personally wouldn't do that, but it's up to them. You know, it's their money. I'm just an advisor, but I wouldn't advise it. But it does happen, especially in areas like Dilworth, South End, and wherever uptown Charlotte is growing. You see a lot of that happening because the bungalows and the cute cottages and things like that may not appraise. They may just be like bulldozer type properties. But then you get into, it's worth this amount of money if you make these repairs, but they just plan on bulldozing it off anyway. So on to the next option that you have. You can always split the difference. You can lower the price a little bit and then the buyer bring less money. That's always an option. So there's different ways to finagle it, but if nothing works and you cannot come to an agreement on the price, the buyer has the right to terminate that contract. They can terminate the contract, and as long as they're in that due diligence period, they will get their earnest money back, but they do forfeit the due diligence money because that is the cost of taking the house off the market. So for example, if you asked for a 20-day due diligence period and you gave the seller $1,000 to take their house off the market, they cashed that $1,000 check and you sent another $1,000 check to the attorney to be held in escrow. Once you terminate within that 20-day period, you have up until 5 o'clock on the very last day. When you terminate, you will get that earnest money check back. So you will get $1,000 back, but you will be out $1,000. And that may be a blessing. I mean, you don't want to buy a house for more than it's worth unless you have like really good plans for that house. Something that I ran into recently. So I've been working with a seller who is also buying a home, but the seller's home, we put it on the market. My CMA was pretty much right on point. However, we had about 20 showings in a 2-day period. It was bonanzas at her house. We went under contract with a contract that was really over. It was really over, and I was like, I told my seller we're going to accept this offer, or I'll advise her to accept the offer, but I said do not be married to this price because it's like there's no comps out there. I was like, best bet it'll the price that I listed it for, or the price that I advise you to list it for, that's going to be the price it sells at. So the appraisal came in short, and we ended up lowering the price to meet that appraisal. It was an FHA buyer. Again, it would have stuck for 6 months. It was in that price range where there are a lot of first-time home buyer FHA borrowers. So she did lower the price to meet the appraisal. However, that's on the first page. There's usually multiple pages and pictures attached to this appraisal. And if you flip to the other pages, you'll see that the house will appraise if these repairs are made. So it's not like the house appraised, yay, next step, let's close. It's make these repairs and then the house will appraise. So what happens if that happens? So what happens if the house appraises but it's requiring repairs, or the seller is selling the house as is? When that happens, again, you can ask the seller to make those repairs. The buyer can pay for those repairs prior to closing, or the buyer and seller can come up with a mixture of the two. So it's all about how to make a win-win situation so the buyer feels like they got a great deal and the seller feels like they sold their house for a good price. The appraisal definitely throws a wrench into things, but there definitely is a way to, again, find that win-win. It just comes to, negotiating, compromising, and just being flexible, because no one expects a low appraisal. I mean, in that house, I expected a low appraisal because I just knew it wasn't going to appraise. But typically, buyers make an offer, sellers accept offers believing that whatever that price is going to close at that price. So if you make an offer that's higher and you're in a multiple offer, highest and best, and you do like way over and the seller accepts, I'm hoping that the seller's agent is telling their client the different scenarios that can happen and mentally preparing them to not be married to the purchase price on the contract. And I also hope that the buyer's agent is mentally preparing the buyer, saying that if this doesn't work, like if this doesn't appraise, the seller doesn't have to sell their house to you for this amount. They can, you know, you can terminate the contract and they can put the house back on the market and sell it to someone else. That's just how it is in real estate. So I hope that answered your questions. If it didn't, please leave your comments below. And while you're down there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the bell so you do not miss any of my other videos in this awesome series. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.